Hello and welcome back to Living a Culture of Life podcast by Human Life International. I'm your host, Colleen, and I'm very excited to have you join us today. On this episode, Father Shenan Boquet and I discuss the state of euthanasia and assisted suicide worldwide, and then Father offers a solution of how we can bring a Catholic vision for human dignity and human life to the secular world. Earlier this year, Father wrote a couple of articles that outlined both concerning developments regarding euthanasia, as well as some hopeful news about laws that were stalled that were trying to legalize euthanasia and assisted suicide. So Father and I discuss both of these situations and what it means for the current momentum regarding end-of-life care. One thing I would like to do in a future episode is do an episode answering your questions about ethical end-of-life care. So if there's anything that you're confused about or situations that you're not sure what the ethical response is, please drop them in the comment section or send us an email at hli@hli.org, and I'll try to address those with Father in the upcoming episode. As always, if you're listening on our audio platforms such as Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe to the show. And if you're listening on our YouTube or Rumble channels, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so that you can get new episodes every Thursday. Without further ado, please welcome Father Boquet to Living a Culture of Life. Welcome back to the podcast, Father.
Well, Colleen, it's always a joy. And of course, these times get a little more difficult in between mission trips, but it's always a blessing when we're able to be together to discuss what's happening around the world.
It's wonderful to have you here. I think you're here for a day and a half right now? So.
Literally in between. Yeah, this has been a very busy time. But it's good. That's what God desires. Ours is to say yes.
Yes. Well, I'm very appreciative of you fitting in time to film an episode while you're here in between all your trips. So
thank you.
Looking forward to this. At the end of January, you wrote some Spirit and Life articles talking about euthanasia. And in those articles, you talked about both some good news, some hopeful news, as well as some concerning developments. So I wanted to just kind of go over those a little bit today and then talk a little bit more about just where we are, where the state of euthanasia is, where you see this going in the future. So let's just start by talking first about the concerning news, because you talk a little bit about first the double sarcopod and then the woman in Canada who was euthanized against her will.
Right. And maybe just the way to kind of lead into this is something I am going to write a little bit more about as we get much closer to the time frame. But Pope Leo XIV, the Vatican just announced what the day for the elderly and grandparents will be this coming July, kind of the theme, if you will. And he's going to focus in that you're not alone. That's basically the overarching message. And the reason why I want to start with that, because as we talk about the topic of euthanasia, as it is oftentimes with those who maybe at the beginning of life are questioning, can I go through this? Can I bring this child, into this world? In a sense, how will I care? All the various questions that people ask are rephrased as people move toward the end of life, or maybe you're facing a terminal illness or a long illness that's going to involve a lot of difficulty and struggle. And usually isolation, a feeling of I'm alone, a feeling I won't be able to carry this alone, kind of like a tsunami, can be very emotional and overwhelm someone to consider something they would not normally have considered, or they may be feeling pressure from others, as we see at the beginning of life. We see toward the end of life, how maybe doctors or healthcare workers, or it could be a family member, a spouse. So these pressures are there. And that's why I just want to start with, because as we talk about these topics, as I mentioned in the article, we also recognize the fact that there is suffering. There is a level of burden that a person carries when they are enduring, severe pain and an illness that has no outcome other than the end of their life. I mean, these are heavy things. Or when a family member is caring for someone and they've been doing it for years, and it's just gotten to be where they're tired, they're worn, they themselves, their health is poor. And again, because they would never have considered this. But as these things continue to kind of move forward, the emotion can be overwhelming. Yeah. And so we don't, as we talk about this, sometimes, the church is saying, well, you just don't care. You're not sensitive. You're not being aware of what's happening. These are false, of course. But so we have to be able to respond to them. So I just want to start with Pope Leo, with regard to what July, when he's going to speak to this issue on a larger scale. But ramping up toward that, I'm going to be writing on it because it's an important topic we have talked about before.
Yeah.
And I'll come back to it in a little while again. But
Well, and I was saying before we began this episode how I'd like to do a future episode on what to do in a situation if you do have a loved one who is considering euthanasia or assisted suicide, things you can say, how to be there for them in a positive, like to help them choose life for themselves. So hopefully we'll be able to do an episode on that once you return from your mission travels.
Exactly. Would love to. And it's an important, very important topic. And so, but back to what we, in the sense of, what's happening. So I began one of my articles, toward the end of January going into February, just talking about, people might remember the sarcopod, So basically this is a gentleman, a doctor, medical doctor here out of Australia. And please forgive me if I mispronounce his last name. I believe it's pronounced, so Dr. Philip Nishke. So please forgive me if I'm mispronouncing it, but he is the founder of Exit International. So Exit International. And he should be familiar to some of our listeners because I've wrote on this before, because he created what's, kind of this futuristic pod that originally called the sarcopod. Now it's called the double Dutch sarcopod, and we'll talk about that. But basically a person can who's choosing to end their life. So by assisted suicide, because Dr. Philip Nishke is providing the means. So he's giving the pod. He's not the one directly, involved. So that's not, but you enter into this pod and you push a button and basically your life comes to an end.
It looks like a spaceship sort of thing.
It looks like something very futuristic. I mentioned in my article, kind of like out of Tron, kind of this futuristic setting. But now, he wasn't satisfied. He's been engaged, and like our audience would be familiar, Dr. Jack Kevorkian out of the United States. People remember Dr. Death. Yeah. Well, this is what Dr. Philip Nishke is called in Australia, Dr. Death. And so he's been engaged in this wanting to find ways to help people in their lives, for several decades. So this is not anything new in regard to his repertoire of trying to advocate for euthanasia and assisted suicide. But now what's happened is he's gone further. So he's created what's called a double Dutch sarcopod, which it's made for couples, made for two people. And he actually, and I want to quote from him because I brought my article with me, because this is what he says people have sent to him and why he created this double Dutch. Yeah. He says, quote, people say, quote, it's so lonely. I want to be held by someone when I die. When you're in a capsule, you're isolated. So they're referencing the original sarcopod, saying you're all alone, but I want to die with my spouse. I want to die with the person I'm in love with. And so we want to do this together and be present with each other. So this is very sad when you hear this.
From a purely secular standpoint, I can kind of understand it. You hear the stories of these couples that have been married 50 years and then they both pass away by natural means within hours of each other. And you look at that from the outside and you say, that's so sweet. They loved each other so much. They never knew life without the other person once they were married. So from a very secular standpoint, you can understand that. But knowing the reality of what euthanasia is, knowing the reality of what assisted suicide is, and also recognizing the pressures that then puts on the other spouse.
That's correct.
It's concerning.
It's very concerning, but it's also the mindset. But also, it's the media, of course, romanticizes it. You just mentioned, something that it's natural that you see a husband and wife married 40, 50, 60, 70 years, and because it's such a closeness to each other that there often can be that they pass within a very short period of each other by natural means, their own natural end. But in this situation, you're having people that are romanticizing this act, which is so contrary to human freedom, so contrary to the good of the human person. And just kind of put out there so that, because it's going to help shape our conversation, is that, when we talk about human dignity, the understanding of human dignity, the sacredness of life is what gives shape to all actions. That understanding of the human person, again, is what gives shape to all actions. So here, one is not free to do something which is contrary to that good. Yeah. So euthanasia and assisted suicide are always intrinsically wrong because it violates the sacredness and dignity of human life. Always. It's an act that cannot be chosen. So it's not so much, as the French bishops will talk about a little while and others, when people say, oh, you're denying people their freedom. No, this is not freedom because you're not free to choose an evil in order to, quote unquote, that because you think it's something good, that as an end that you wish. No. So it's important that we see that, how the media has romanticized this, how they almost kind of valorizing, kind of lifting up euthanasia as a noble act. Someone's taking charge of their own destiny, their self-determination, this kind of what article we talked about last week, Mandani out of New York, rugged individualism. This idea that I'm my own determination is such a false narrative. And what you just said is something we're going to talk more about, and that is, what are the consequences of such a mindset?
Yeah.
So this is what we just saw at the very beginning of our year. So it's kind of walking into this new year. We're starting to see not only the continuation of advocating for euthanasia, but we're also seeing some pushback, which I know we'll get to.
Could you also talk briefly before we get into the hopeful news about the woman in Canada who was euthanized?
What happened was that she wanted to. Her first decision was that she wanted to be euthanized.
Okay.
And so she was asking for this, and so she was seeking this end. But then when she changed her mind and decided she did not want this, basically the whole mechanization that was already set in motion through the doctors and healthcare just continue to move forward with it.
Okay.
And this is a tremendous, tremendous danger.
Terrifying.
And not only that, so remember that euthanasia, assisted suicide, what we call in Canada MAID, with even other parts of the world refer to it as MAID, so medically assistance in dying.
Yeah.
So it's 2016 when Canada first legalized this. So
10 years ago.
Look what's happened in 10 years. Now I just read, and I'm working on an article that's going to be addressing this, is it's not a new thing, because in 2022, there were those advocating for children, babies, infants to be euthanized because of abnormalities, genetic issues, or disease. It's now back again. It looks like it's going to push. So Canada just continues to push the envelope, further and further towards this horrible approach toward human life. And so along with the Netherlands, these are the two worst places in the world.
Yeah.
But this case that we mentioned that you brought up about the lady in Canada is not an uncommon story, as I talk about in my column. The column that I make references to is in February 2nd's column. So people can come back, catch the links, catch the story, and really maybe read a little bit more on it. But it's a frightening reality, because so much for autonomy, so much for freedom, so much for self-determination, that even when you say no, well, we think it's still better for you. We know better. So we're back to a paternalistic system here. So it's a dangerous thing. And unfortunately, I wish I can say it was only isolated, Colleen, to one country, which is bad enough. Even one incident is horrible, but it is playing out in many parts of the world where governments have legalized this practice.
It feels like right now there's this kind of swell of it's building, and it's going to start breaking in other countries, and it's going to start becoming even more of an issue than it is now. It's already bad, but from my perspective, it seems like this is kind of the next big fight on the horizon for pro-lifers as it starts trickling into the U.S. and spreading its tentacles outward.
Right. It's not. It's, as you and I both know, serving this great mission. The culture of death and evil that is behind it knows no end. So just like I mentioned with Canada looking at now trying to further push the acceptance of euthanasia and assisted suicide by looking at infants. So literally, it's not the child that's going to make that decision. So it's going to be someone else making that decision. Someone else is going to be like the lady who decided, I won't know. Well, someone else determined, well, your no doesn't have any value. So here it's going to be parents who are being pressured, or parents, like I mentioned earlier, who are dealing with a very difficult situation, watching their child that they love and care for deal with a horrific disease, or maybe a long-term illness, or some handicap that's going to be, very debilitating. Anyone who's been in those situations inside a family knows how hard that is. And you can imagine the pressure, the push, right? And what are people's breaking points? And we're going to talk about how we respond to that, right? And so, and what the churches, and why the church's teaching is always the path forward, and why that teaching has such a root and such a goodness to it, right? So, but again, these are real situations occurring. And so, and then what's next? Well, let's take the parent out of the equation. Well, the doctor can make that call, and so this is the word danger does not capture how bad this situation is. And so at the same time we see Canada and the Netherlands, and we see, Dr. Philip Nitschke, out of Australia, Dr. Death, advocating his product around the world where it's legalized, and people trying to valorize this and romanticize this. There are other countries saying, whoa, stop.
And I believe that those are both France and the UK currently. So
Correct.
You wrote a follow-up article the next week
That's correct.
on those topics. So let's share now the hopefully guardrails that are being put on this in other countries.
And just as a side, just as I have often made a reference to, I really encourage our listeners to go to the ethical and religious directives for Catholic healthcare services. So this is the Church's understanding of how we approach care. Whether that be in a hospital, whether that be in a clinic, whether that be in a nursing assisted place for the elderly and those with diseases. Our approach always starts back to what I said, that because of the human person and the dignity of the human person and the sacredness of human life, that understanding is what gives shape to all our decisions. But it also shapes our approach. It shapes how we address. So I want to just make sure we keep that always in the front, because so many times, really, people don't know what the Church truly teaches and why she teaches what she does, and what principles is she being guided by, and not only in her healthcare institutions, but in every manner of how we stand for the dignity of human life at every stage. And so if we don't understand that, then it does seem that the Church is intrusive. Her teaching seems far-fetched. It seems, what is all this about? Why are you so passionate and so committed to this cause? Well, when people don't understand, and even when they do understand, we still get that pushback. But many of our people, our followers, and many people in our Catholic faith don't understand our Catholic tradition and moral principles. We need to understand them. So I really want to continue to encourage people to read and to study those principles. So with that said, because why am I bringing it up? Because the French bishops, were very, very strong in their assault on this proposed bill and condemning it. We saw this obviously from the bishops in the UK. This is Scotland and Wales and England. Again, as the Church would, she is saying, no, this is not the approach. This is not the answer. This is not how we deal with human beings. And so with all that said, we also recognize what you have already talked about, because of these horrific stories that are coming out, because everything now is on the headlines. So people are seeing, like the woman in Canada, or now with Canada through its MAID program trying to go after children now. People are seeing this and going, wait a minute. So people feel a sense there should be a limitation. Of course, we're not advocating for a limitation. No, this should never be an option. So, but the idea is people see this, and this isn't happening now with those in Congresses and legislative bodies and parliaments around the world. They're hearing the stories and they're going, wait a minute, and the safeguards are not working. Remember, the Netherlands and Canada says there's safeguards. We have all these safeguards in place. So let's go back to the double Dutch, all right, just for a moment. All right, here's one of those safeguards, right? So according to the Netherlands, and the way this is understood, is that now you have to have a psychiatric exam by a psychiatrist, before you can choose to be euthanized.
Okay.
So what is the answer from Dr. Philip Nitschke? Well, I'm going to install an AI-assisted program within the sarco pod that a person now doesn't need to go through that process by making an appointment, seeing a person. So now an AI-driven approach is going to make a determination. So as an avatar, he says, an AI avatar is now going to determine if you're a candidate for euthanasia and are approved. And if you're approved, as long as you hit the button within 24 hours, you're good to go. So what could go wrong with something like that?
That's
all right?
Absolutely terrifying.
So just like the woman in Canada whose life is deprived because someone else, now this in case, it's not an avatar, this is a human being or a group of people that decided, no, we're still going to go forward. And so the danger is both places.
Yeah.
But in this situation, there's no human component here. There's no one that is able to from as only humans can, is to really use human intellect and wisdom and understanding to be able to respond to certain situations to say no. Not that it's ever permissible, please. I want to make sure our audience, we know that. Make sure
this is just an example of how the like quote unquote guardrails that like oftentimes are put in place to, in theory, be able to limit the abuse of this system just don't hold up. So obviously never okay in the first place, but it's also one of those things that once you pass it into law, it very, very slippery slope.
Exactly. And in some cases where there are supposed to be 2 different separate panels, 3 different doctors, we talked about it before. People window shop. They look for the doctors that are going to be able to check the box and sign the name and move along, pay your fee, and out you go. These are, again, these are all supposedly the safeguards that are meant to protect vulnerable people.
In some ways, I'm not going to say it's good that there's so much abuse going on in Canada at all. However, I feel like when Canada was first passing this, there weren't as many examples of tangible things people could bring up saying, this is an abuse, this is an abuse, this is an abuse. And now that there's so much abuse going on, it's hitting the headlines, there's real life examples of what could go wrong, it's a lot easier to protest these type of bills passing in other countries because you can say, hey, you say that there's this guardrail X, Y, and Z here that's supposed to prevent abuses from happening, but Canada did the same thing and look at everything that's happening there. So hopefully we can put the brakes on what's going on in Canada and return that country to the sanctity of life, but also being able to say, hey, look, there's all these examples of people that have been killed when they shouldn't have been. No, they're not like any of them should have been. But
Exactly. Yeah. But what's important is to see that no matter how many safeguards, you're always going to have this loophole, because you always have something arbitrary, because this is why it's so dangerous, because it's completely arbitrary.
You've opened the door to death.
That's correct.
You've opened the door to killing someone being a legitimate option. And as soon as you do that, you can open that door a lot wider. And it's...
Who would have ever thought 10 years later, now again, 2022, some in the Canadian government and in the medical association and wanted to advocate for the killing of children, all right, under MAID's program. So we should not be surprised, because it's arbitrary. So if we're going to come back to this in a little while, back to that principle that if everything we do is based upon the good and the well-being and the sacredness of human life, it changes our approach completely. So there's no reason for MAID. There would be no reason for euthanasia and assisted suicide. Well, there never is. But the idea is no one would be looking that direction if we truly advocated for the core principle, which is the sacredness of human life. That is never lost because of age, development, illness, or disease. I mean, nothing changes it. We'll come back to that. But what you mentioned is that there's stories and the horrific stories that we're seeing out there, and the far-fetched positions like killing children, is just pushing people and saying, wait a minute, there is a line that people don't want to cross, and their sensitivities are still there. And they realize there's something wrong with that, all right? And no matter how much the media tries to romanticize something, something's wrong where, let's just say that, I'm going to make up some names, that and my typical names, Bob and Cindy, that I often use. But Bob believes that he wants to be euthanized. Oh, Cindy, don't you think you ought to join me in that? Cindy, don't you think? So the pressure that begins to happen here when we begin to romanticize death, and like Dr. Jack Kevorkian did, and like Dr. Philip Nishke is doing. I mean, they're fascinated by death, and if you look at their lives and you look at what they were engaged in and are engaged in, it would frighten you to death. What these people are doing and what they believe, and so it's a danger, because as we see with MAID, doctors are engaged now in advocating for death. We have healthcare workers, who are overcome by the number of people they're caring for because of a lack of financial support and so forth. We can see how family members begin to feel pressured because they're overwhelmed, they're tired. So all of a sudden, you can see how all that is used, by this industry to push, and it continues to advocate. And so an example of this was an article written by the BBC, which is in my second article, and people can come back to, about some of the things that within the UK that they wanted to why they want to change the bill. They want to make amendments to the bill.
Can we just give our audience a little context of what's going on with this bill? I believe it's been moving through the UK's system to become law. And then could you talk a little bit about what's going on with it now? I think we might have touched on it last summer, but I haven't been following the process.
So what's happened is, so like here, just use the United States, we know that a bill can be proposed by either the Senate or by the House, right? But they must pass through each of the houses, okay, and be approved by the House and the Senate, and with amendments and so forth, and then eventually signed into law by the President of the United States.
Yeah,
that's what makes a bill into a law, right? So in other countries, it's very similar. You have the lower house, the upper chamber. Depends on what country we're talking about. But there could be different ways of what they call readings. So it might go through various, renditions and reiterations and so forth, or iterations, I should say. And then eventually approved, and then it becomes law. So here in the UK, this has been something that started last year, actually a little longer than that, and has gone through different readings, different reviews, different rewrites. And so it had made it through one of the, I think in this case, the upper chamber, and then it was returned back to the lower chamber, and just people began to say, no, there's some problems with this. And in each case, there were people adding. And so let's kind of, pause there for a minute. So people who advocate for euthanasia and suicide are not happy. They don't want the amendments. If anything else, they want it to be more aggressive. They want it to be more open, more in a possibility of more possibilities. And so they look at this and say, stop tinkering with my bill, stop playing with it. If anything else, make it easier, right? Yeah. That's what they want, right? So, but what people have done, so the BBC reported on this and said what was happening in the UK House of Lords is where a lot of this was amendments were coming. And so, and saying that basically what they want to do is curtail some of the bill. They want to say, so explicitly remove pregnant women from eligibility. Yeah. Right? So, restricting assisted deaths to cases where a person's suffering cannot be relieved by treatment. So here, just that one thing. So how many times have we talked about, and I've written about, where there are the person who chooses to be euthanized or chooses a path of assisted suicide has a treatable disease. Yeah. And yet still goes through this process. So the House of Lords is some of the members saying, no, if it can be something that's treatable, you can't have this path. Yeah. Right? Two, the third one, changes to how a person's capacity to request assisted suicide needs to be assessed. So re-looking at those safeguards, what are those requirements? Are we going to move? It doesn't really go into great detail here. And even the BBC article doesn't go into a lot of great detail. What does that mean? Does that mean 4 panels of doctors? Does that mean a panel of a board? In other words, but they're looking to put more restrictions, more guardrails, if you will, right, to prevent these horrific cases that they're hearing about. Also lifting the age. That's good. To at least 25. Yeah. So now, as you were saying, because people may come into our podcast at midstream, we are not advocating for any of this, obviously.
Never okay.
Right. So, but just important, then doubling the period of reflection between assessments. So it's not something like, go back to the double Dutch sarcopod. Yeah. Can't go in there, have a little avatar, AI assistant software help you fulfill your psychiatric assessment, and within 24 hours, that's all you have, unless you have to do another assessment. You just push the button and the avatar will help you. So that would not fly here, right? So they're just saying there needs to be time. Yeah. So let's go back to the woman in Canada who said no. Yeah, she originally said yes, and then she thought about it and said no. She thought about it, right? And so here we are. And we know that there are stories that at the beginning of life, very similar, where a woman has found herself thinking that this is what she wanted and changes her mind. And unfortunately, her freedom is taken from her. Yeah. And the life of her child is taken from her. So we see the abuses. And so what the House of Lords here was doing, some members was saying, we need to put more restrictions, tighten the guardrails. But as we said, right, and even though the UK pro-life movement there has been very happy to see this, these stop gaps, if you will, stopping, pausing, reflecting, they're like us. I mean, we don't want to see any of this, any legalization of euthanasia and assisted suicide. If anything else, we want to, if it is legal, we want to make it illegal again. Yeah. Right? That's what we're after.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like, I could be misremembering this. I wish that I had followed this more closely last summer. But my impression was that it was moving through the UK system pretty easily. And then there's been a lot more people being concerned, even people that aren't necessarily strictly pro-life groups, but disability groups, realizing how vulnerable people with disabilities are going to be under it. And it seems like that's probably part of what's resulting in all of these guardrails being put up. Again, not that those guardrails are good, but it shows that there is some resistance. There's friction to just opening the floodgates to euthanasia.
Well, what's good is also shows that the pro-life movement is making a difference. That those, and no matter, like you just said, I remember, the UK trying to push, where children or people diagnosed with Down syndrome, and again, just advocating, in the sense of wanting to promote the ability to take their lives, and and there was an enormous pushback, right? And because of that, it stopped in its track. Doesn't mean it's still not out there, but I mean, its momentum got put on hold. I believe that's what's happening here, and you just gave light to it. I mean, when you start talking about people with disabilities, whether those disabilities be from a physical handicap or a cognitive handicap, how are they capable of making a free decision, and so forth and so on. They're vulnerable. And what about our elderly who are extremely vulnerable to any pressure? Right? What about those who are sickly and have no other advocates for them? Maybe all their family has gone. They may be the last one of their immediate family. Who advocates for them? Right? So this is what happens, among many other reasoning that the swell is rising. And because things are now, again, on the headlines, people see the stories and say, I don't want to be in a situation like that. And because the church is a tireless fighter. She's unrelentless in her desire to hold the truth. So because of the French bishops, because of the bishops in the UK, because of the Universal Church, the Holy Father himself, under Pope Francis, now his successor, Pope Leo, been a strong voice pushing against this thing. This is very, very good, right? And so it's having an impact.
Well, and one reason that this is hopeful news is not because this law still being talked about is good, but because it shows, like we were just saying, that there is a momentum shift, that there is resistance being put up to just the legalizing of killing being a quote unquote medical option at the end of life. And so it's not that the fact that this law is even still being considered as good, but the fact that there seems to be resistance. People are waking up, people are recognizing the other abuses that are going on and saying, hey, we don't want that in our country. So, and hopefully it means that we can push back on it entirely.
Absolutely. And we're going to come, I'll explain that not all things are roses. Right. Okay. But think about this. They want people to believe there's only two options.
Yeah. False dichotomy.
Right. That they really believe, they want people to believe that two things. Shame on the church. How dare the church, only, let people, either they have to accept the fact that they got an illness and disease and maybe a lifetime of suffering. That's option one.
Yeah.
Or the other options, kill yourself.
Yeah.
That's the only two they want people to look at. But what is, not that it's an option, what is the third way of looking at it? And that is, again, what the church has always advocated for, true palliative care, the true care of a human being and the true accompaniment of a person who may be in those kinds of situations, and my obligation to my neighbor, and in our obligation to our neighbor. Go back to the principle I started with. This is why that principle is so important, because if all decisions and actions are based upon the dignity and the sacredness of human life, then our decisions, we would not be in this situation. We would be dealing with, as we know in palliative care, is really caring for the individual, even when we know that the outcome is the fact that this illness will end in death, or that there's nothing that modern science can do to change the disability or change the genetic abnormality, whatever the dynamic may be. But what we can bring is pain management. We can bring true care and in a sense of love and attentiveness and be present to someone, no longer in isolation. So the devil likes to work in the dark. This is what this likes. It wants isolation. This is what it really valorizes, is the advancement of isolation, abandonment, and now the false narrative is that, but you can be in charge. You can take charge of your life. What you've done is remove yourself from the ability of others to care for you. But let's be honest, the whole other side of that movement that's exactly what it's done, because our culture has become so, in a sense, acceptant of the culture of death, that we don't see our obligation toward each other. We don't see our responsibility toward each other. We don't see our neighbor. And that's the challenge that we have to keep preaching the gospel. But what the church has always advocated for is the answer to who is my neighbor. We can answer that question, right? And this is what's important. This is why, we think about the Catholic Church throughout the centuries. Who outside, I would just to put it this way, I'll just be as bold to say it. There is no other entity that provides the genuine care that Holy Mother, the Church, does through her charities and ministries and institutions. There's no one that does this, and it's not looking for profit. We're not looking for some profitable gain. Our healthcare institutions from the very beginning were a response to our Lord Jesus Christ, in response to His command, love one another as I have loved you. And so this is the model. And so the outreach, the care, and it doesn't ask what's your ethnic background, what's your religious status. People who are in need are people in need, and we respond to that need. This is what care is about. And this is why we push against this narrative of euthanasia and assisted suicide, why we push against the abortion mindset, why we even push against the contraceptive mindset, because that's really the starting point of all this, all right? All right? Because it falsifies a good. They all falsify a good, and they abuse a good. And this is why the church is constantly out there, in her rally call, reminding us this is not the answer. The Cardinal of Jerusalem just mentioned this recently. I quoted him in the article. There are several quotes here from the French bishops in the article. These are not random. These are stated around the world.
You've mentioned the French bishops a few times, and we were also talking about palliative care. So could you talk a little bit for our audience about what's going on in France? Because I believe that the pro-euthanasia assisted suicide bill was stalled in the process, and then they're also looking to open up more palliative care. Is that a correct understanding?
Well, this is so the bill in France has been put on hold. Okay. Right? Okay. Yeah. So it's obviously, as we know with any of these bills, the reiterations or iterations come along that people just kind of keep represent. It's going to be on guard, always on guard. But what's happened in France is that it's been put on hold for all the reasons we've been talking about. Yeah. And what, Cardinal Pizzaballa and others have been saying, like the French bishops are saying, is what the church does say, is that what is our response? Yeah. And why are we not putting funding into palliative care? We've talked about this before, you and I. Yeah. When you look at it in the United States, how much funding is placed into this particular aspect of care? Very little. So the idea of research funding, grants, look at the other side, how much is given to this. Well, if we take those funds and we take that approach toward real, true, compassionate care, palliative care, and begin to incentivize this way of approach, then you're going to see more people, take that path. Now, it shouldn't be because there is a financial gain. It shouldn't be because I can make more money. It shouldn't be because of that at all. That's not what I'm saying here. But this helps. Right? Because what it does is it incentivizes doctors to be able to see that there is a value in this that we want to advocate for. Again, the idea is that we should be doing that anyway. But if there is a way to help advance that, this is one way to do it. And so we need to be able to bring and explain what that means to people. People don't really understand what palliative care is. And they don't understand. That's why I go back to the ethical and religious directives for Catholic healthcare services, because it talks about pain management. It talks about how do we approach, the care of an individual. Why is water and food always considered ordinary care? Why is that the case? Yeah. These are things that need to be talked about, and providing, I can tell you what I would say is this. I remember a story of a priest, that was traveling to visit another priest that he come to know as a friend in a different country. In this case, it was the Philippines. Okay. And when he was visiting the Philippines, I think I've shared this story before. Sadly, he had a very, very bad heart attack, a very major heart attack, and came close to dying. He is in one of the rural villages out in the Philippines. I forget what part of the archipelago he was in, but he received such care, and unfortunately he survived the heart attack, and the side effects were minimal. Praise be God. But he said he's never been so cared for. And the attentiveness and the tenderness of the nurses and the staff and the doctors. And he says, and there was no air conditioning, there was no modern conveniences, all the things that people would go if they went to, the Cleveland Clinic or Johns Hopkins or major hospitals and the Mayo Clinics and so forth. And he says, but here they knew my name, they cared for me. I received the sacraments every day. I mean, it was 24-hour care, always, attentiveness. In the sense, I was treated as a human being.
Yeah.
I was cared for as a person with dignity, and I was a vulnerable person in need, and they came to my rescue. He says, and I wasn't just simply another patient on the ward.
Yeah.
I was one among many people being loved and cared for by these beautiful people. And palliative care starts with that understanding of the sacredness of human life, and also understands the reality that you're suffering. There is an illness, but we will be here with you. We will find ways to manage your pain, care for you through this process.
Well, and that's how medical care should be, and just care in general is recognizing, being able to see people as people, being able to know their name, treat them very personably, not in like a shallow way, but in a way that recognizes their dignity. And I don't know, if just putting myself in the shoes of, like, I can't imagine being in that position and how different that would be from being in a sterile hospital where you're one patient on a chart and everyone's busy and nobody knows your name, to having this more person-centered care. And I don't know, it's just, there's something very beautiful about imagining if we're able to offer that to people and just taking that into your vocation in the medical
world. And if
world.
I would say this way, and it's a little blunt, it's probably a little more, just the idea that, if we don't understand the sacredness of life, then people are scared to go to their doctors.
Yeah.
And I would be very scared to be in any of these countries and be sick.
Yeah.
Because their starting point is not the sacredness of my life and the dignity of my life. They have a very utilitarian approach to human life. And it's all about, definitions and quality of life definitions and basically usefulness or non-usefulness. And it has a very different definition. And as a result, it puts my life in jeopardy. It puts the value of my life in jeopardy. Yeah. And because I've been arbitrarily determined that I may no longer have value.
You're in a very vulnerable state, and you're trusting your life to someone who may not value your life.
And put yourself now where you do have reasons to be vulnerable. That you are elderly and maybe have no advocates fighting for you. You have no proxy at your bedside. You are a child, completely vulnerable. All right. And so the opposite is that if I take away those fears and those anxiousness and the anxiousness that comes along with that, and I begin to realize that everyone will have my value in their best of interest, my good, my well-being. See, that's where freedom is found. That's the definition of freedom. All right. Freedom is that I will do no harm, to that value. So it's a false understanding of freedom that chooses something that does harm.
I want to return for one moment to the situation in France, because I found the part of the article that I was remembering when I asked the question. Sure. And so basically what happened is that the French Senate rejected this bill, and I think it got sent back down to the lower house. But in your article, you said, however, a sizable number of other critics argued that the bill was both dangerous and unnecessary. They argued that the focus should be on expanding access to palliative care and compassionate support, not normalizing death as a solution to suffering. Right. Adding weight to this interpretation is the fact that immediately after rejecting the euthanasia and assisted suicide bill, the upper house overwhelmingly passed a bill promoting greater access to quality palliative care. So that was what I was remembering, is that the two kind of went hand in hand, where you have the French Senate rejecting assisted suicide and euthanasia, and then simultaneously trying to strengthen quality palliative care.
That's right. And what's beautiful is that you just quoted from the article is, why are we normalizing death as a solution, right? As the only way to resolve, quote unquote, these issues. In a way, similar to the beginning of life, right? Yeah. Abortion is, quote unquote, always the answer, right? And so it's the same mentality that we see at the beginning that assaults human life, that we see in these very vulnerable things at the end of life, or in the issues of dealing with illness. And so this is the proper way, in the sense of, incentivizing, investing, and changing the mindset, But what's interesting, sadly, in France is where we see the beginning of life, where life is threatened. They don't see the connections.
Yeah.
So this is why, again, we have to keep pushing, an understanding of human dignity and our response to the human person, and not just a response, Colleen, it's an obligation to the human person. We have an obligation to each other.
What do you think the solution is, though? Because I feel like we have such a secularized world who don't have the religious understanding of human dignity. How do you encourage medical professionals to respect human dignity, to respect the sanctity of life? Because like we were just saying, that's an incredibly toxic mindset to have in the medical profession. If people in the medical profession don't recognize your dignity, your value, your God-given worth, like how do you convince people who are secular, who don't have an understanding of God, that each person's human life is worthwhile and should be protected?
So there goes to the heart of the church as own mission, because it's preaching the gospel. I mean, so as you've heard me use the analogy, people, when you see an iceberg, you only see 10% of it. There's 90% underneath it. So the med school is not in a vacuum; it's in a culture. All right, and that even that local culture exists in a larger culture. So it's underneath. You got to get underneath it, and that's why it really is why the church's gospel, and not church, why the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ, which the church is entrusted with to proclaim to the ends of the earth. It's about evangelization. It's about formation, catechesis, an unyielding spirit, never yielding, to the culture of death, and we just need to keep pushing against that wave, that culture of death, what John Paul called the spirit of death, and this is what we're up against. So you're absolutely correct, because when you meet, and not every person goes into the beautiful vocation of medicine, right? And I reiterate vocation because it's the noblest of vocations, because it serves the human person, right? The pinnacle of creation. It is a beautiful vocation, but it has been lost to many, right? And so, but many go in with none of this mindset. But sadly, what we've seen is because of the systems, right, and the way they force people down these pathways. So this is why it's really about getting underneath what we see and getting to the systemic reasons why we're here. And why we're here is because we devalue human life. We treat life purely from a utilitarian mindset, a usury, in the sense of it's a transactional approach toward life. All right, this is not what human life is. All right, and so that's why we have to keep advocating, preaching, teaching the gospel, proclaiming the gospel, evangelizing others, giving witness to others. This is why I love about the Catholic Medical Association, among many associated that are advocating in those environments for a very different approach, a different perspective, and fighting the good fight. This is why we have those in the legal profession doing the same thing. There's so many on every plane, those within houses of Congress. They're doing this. We got to keep pushing.
Well, it seems like the education, obviously this is a huge part of HLI's mission, is just the importance of having human-centered education, especially for people entering the medical field, because I haven't obviously been through medical school, so I just feel like I hear anecdotal stories of people that are studying to be OBGYNs learning about how to do abortions, or people like learning that contraception is the solution to women's hormonal problems when it's not. It's a Band-Aid fix. And so just things like this, like it's almost ingrained into the educational system. So the importance of having people who have a Catholic understanding of healthcare being the ones who are actually teaching the classes, writing the textbooks, and actually making sure that the next generation of medical professionals is being formed with a human-centered, holistic view of the human person.
Well, people like Dr. Philip Nitschke continues what he's doing because there's a market for it. The reason why Jack Kevorkian was successful, because there was a market for it. Look in the United States, we have state now, was it 12, 13, when the number is that now have either legalized or are approaching to legalize assisted suicide. So let's go back to what I said earlier. Not everything is all good. We have an aging population around the world, a growing aging population, which is why, we see the growth in euthanasia and assisted suicide happening, because healthcare systems are not receiving the funding they need. Insurance companies are not able to receive the funding they want. People are not able to find the coverage that they need. Socialized medicine in many countries doesn't have a tax base because they're not receiving, because we have an aging population. And so these all have consequences.
People didn't have kids too.
Because
just
of low
thinking
birth
about
rates.
If you have two couples and they each have one child and those children get married, then that one couple is taking care of 4 aging parents between the two of them. And then you end up in a situation where, okay, do those two couple, does that couple, do they welcome more children and have more responsibility when they already know that they're going to have to be investing resources and time into caring for their aging parents? Maybe not. So it's you end up affecting both, where it's going to affect the birth rate, where people are like, well, I have to take care of my parents. We can't welcome kids right now. Or we're welcoming kids. We don't have a lot of time, money, and resources to be able to take care of our parents. So it's just going to be very challenging, I think, in the next coming decades of trying to encourage young couples to welcome children and also provide them the support they need to take care of their parents.
It's just the idea that nothing happens in a vacuum. So we did not come to this point at this stage where we're seeing, as we've seen it in the Netherlands, and now we've seen it in Canada, and we've seen other parts of the world. These have been ongoing, have been decades of practice. We know that the whole euthanasia movement, we've been part of our resource in HLI goes through that history, shows much of how this movement began, and eugenics itself. All this is part of this conversation.
All tied together, yeah.
And so we need to be honest about how we have gotten to this point, what has created the mindset, what is now incentivized a behavior, and what's trying to be normalized. And what's good to see, as you quoted among the French Senate, saying that why are we normalizing death as the answer?
Yeah.
Right. And so that's a good thing. But that's a lone voice out in the wilderness. Well. Yeah. But John the Baptist was a lone voice out in the wilderness, preparing the way of the Lord. So this is why HLI is sometimes alone in many different parts of the world where she is advocating and serving, the only voice that's speaking out. And so that is the John the Baptist. We need John the Baptist out in the world preaching. And so what I would say is, if I could encourage, not telling people what to do, but on diocesan level, obviously we know what the church teaches. We know that our shepherds are advocating for what our church teaches. But what I find kind of goes what you meant earlier, we don't have time today, is how do we respond?
Yeah.
Right? And so I want to plant that seed now for our conversation, and this is why I really do like what Pope Francis began with the day for the elderly and the grandparents and so forth, because we tend to forget, even with no ill intent in mind, that a person out of sight is out of mind. That cliche, all right? Yeah. That little phrase. But it happens in parish life. It happens on a diocesan life, right? And again, you don't have to, it's not something people intend to happen or desire to happen in any way. But the moment someone begins to fall out of sight, we tend to move on. And the challenge on every level, especially on using our principle of subsidiarity, is on that very base level of community participation, is how do we keep the links and the connections to our loved ones? And let's be honest, we live in a culture today that does valorize technology and independence, and we're mobile, we're all over everyone's not living by their families anymore. What happens is it actually promotes isolation.
Yeah.
And so we have to, those things are not bad things, all right? Right? But if those things begin to inhibit my relationship to the people in my life, there is a problem there that needs to be reassessed, right? This is why Pope Leo has been talking about AI in a sense of as an artificial intelligence. What will be some of the consequences if we embrace the approach, and how will it affect human beings? Because that's always the question. Remember, our actions and decisions should start with our understanding of the human person. And we are social beings. We are made in community, and we're made to be in part of a socialized connection with each other. So, but we in parish life, oftentimes is our homebound, our elderly, our sick, our dying, are removed from the daily life, from the Sunday life. And people might remember them for a little while, but then they get further and further away and their memory becomes less and less. We have to push against that.
Yeah.
And we have to create systems within our parish level at those very base levels of the importance of family. We speak the word, we say the word, we need to live the word. And we also need to make sure that our outreach, these are the most vulnerable, among the most vulnerable of our parishes. We need to go out of our way to make sure that the linkage remains, that isolation does not occur, is minimized as much as possible, so that their vulnerabilities become less. And by what I find is the more that we do that, then we become their advocate. We become their proxy. We become someone that's with them. They're not alone in their decision making. They're not alone when they're confronted by difficulties and challenges. We need to do this with couples who are dealing with children with special needs. We need to do this, with single parents who by no fault are because of decision making. That's where they are. We need to outreach to them. We need to recognize. I say this not only to the lay families. Look what we've done to our priest.
Yeah.
Look what we do to our consecrated men and women. Now, they're a little more, please forgive me for saying the word, but a little more fortunate because they do have a community.
Yeah.
Typically, but not always, right? But especially secular priests, diocesan priests, can so easily begin to fall away from the memory.
Yeah.
And I remember that serving my brothers who were in those age brackets. We have to fight against that. That's at diocesan level. How do we keep them involved? How do we engage them? There's a wonderful priest in my diocese, Father Rocknaken, who's the oldest priest in the diocese now. He's in his early 90s, and beautiful, faithful man, and still, fortunately, because of his family and others, still very active, still very visible, and that's beautiful to see him. I saw him at the recent ordination of my new bishop, and it was so wonderful to see him. I was assigned to him almost 40 years ago, and so it's just a beautiful reminder of our connection to each other, and we sat together and we had lunch. We reminisced. We caught back up again, and it's so important. This is how we push against this narrative, and this is how we need to begin to in a sense of what John Paul said in Evangelium Vitae. We have to reteach.
Yeah.
So we have to reteach in our medical schools. We have to reteach in our nursing schools. We have to reteach at every level. And this is our mission.
Yeah.
And I'm not afraid. I'm grateful for it. I mean, and that's why these podcasts are important, even though we may be speaking to the choir in most cases, but the choir has other choir members. We have other people we connect to. And who knows, this one story may connect to someone. Oh, Betty, you ought to listen to this. This is something you're dealing with. We all know other people. And if I may, I'm going to just in with this on this part, just say, it doesn't fall to them. It falls to me. I'm the first actor. So anyway, it's us. So when you just mentioned earlier, when you have a couple that's caring for both sets of parents that are elderly, or maybe there's grandparents. Dr. Brian Close, when we talk about the effect of contraception, we call it the links, the chains that bind. So when you got married, you married a family. You didn't marry in the sense of, and I know people like to hear that much, but I like that phrase because you do. You're bringing families together into this beautiful bond of marriage. And marriage is about sacrificial love. It's in good times and bad, and richer and poor, in sickness and health, to death do us part. This pledge toward each other. And there is no fear in you that your husband will do anything other than love you and care for you in good times and bad. All that. That's the stability, the constancy. It takes away the fear. It takes away the anxiety. And it brings a peace, knowing I'm not alone.
Yeah.
Right? So that's carried over into the care of our family.
Yeah.
And it's carried over into the extended. But what like in contraception, it breaks that link, right? Because no longer, and that's what divorce does. It breaks a link. It severs this link that's not meant to be broken, right? And so it's just this danger that gets in here.
Yeah.
And so here, that's what euthanasia and assisted suicide does. It breaks the link. It takes me out of the equation.
there's so much fracturing within the culture of death, the fracturing of relationships, fracturing of generations, fracturing of communities
Exactly.
that you end up and it makes it like doing that like initial fracturing of using contraception within marriage then like ends up having these ripple effects down the line that you might not be anticipating at that point. So.
Exactly. No, it's an important thing, and this is why I just say that this is why our church is her holy wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
her years of understanding truth, which truly liberates.
Mm-hmm.
But that truth is not just for one time frame.
Yeah.
It's the truth yesterday, today, and it will be the truth tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very proud when I see our conference of bishops and see individual bishops, weathering the storm, standing in the breach, fighting the good fight, and we don't. Sadly, we don't win, but we're not every battle. But it's not so much that we're taking tally about what we won. We're standing up for truth. We're standing up for the dignity of life, and we just got to keep doing it.
Amen. Well, there's one last question today, Father, and we can keep this brief, but I just want to put a little
That's
bow
hard
on
for
the
me,
conversation.
Keep it brief.
Same. But just to put a little bow on this conversation, as we were talking a little bit about some of the abuses of euthanasia, some concerning things that we see, some of the hopeful things we see where there seems to be some legal resistance. People are waking up to the fact that there's these abuses. Do you think that the tide is changing around this topic? Because in one of your articles, you were talking about how the transgender ideology over the past few years, abuses came out, people realized, pushed back, and then the tide hopefully seems to be turning and going in the opposite direction right now. And hopefully we can keep that momentum up. Do you see something similar happening with euthanasia right now at this moment? Or is this still something that like we're balancing right on the edge and it could go either direction?
I mean, there's no guarantee. Okay. I mean, and the same thing as we've seen with the whole gender dysphoria and gender ideology. As my article of last week, talked about with the American Medical Association and the American Association of Plastic Surgeons and their comments, and they're, challenging, what just a year ago, 2 years ago, they were advocating for.
Yeah.
Right. So the winds can change direction, and as a result, people can become more sane and realize the harm. And that's also what's happening. When you see the harms that have been done, and people are seeing these harms and the headlines of these harms, and people are realizing that, as we've always said, and the church has always said, this is not, for the good of children. This is a harm. And so that's good to see, that we're seeing the pushback. We're seeing potentials in change in procedures and policies and approaches. It's not far enough, but you keep going.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why you said, don't let the guard down and don't stop. Here, I believe it's kind of motivated by similar realities. People are seeing, but maybe that's what it takes for people to see the harm in a sense of, as I would often do in the season of Lent, when people would ask for a particular penance. And one little game that I would often play with the school kids is as you have a beautiful jar here, a nice pint-sized jar of water and flavored with lime or lemon, whatever you may have there, is to use that same jar. And I'm just going to use an example of if telling a lie, using a bad phrase, a bad word. Every time you do that, you pick a bean that you don't like eating. So whether that be a red bean, a sweet pea, I don't care. Pick something, dry, obviously, nothing that's going to be fresh.
Yeah.
And you put, every time you do it, put a bean in your jar. At the end of Lent, you have to eat all the beans. We've got to cook them, and you have to eat what you have created. And it's just the idea that it's a visualization.
Yeah.
And it was fun to watch and it takes honesty. It takes an honest person to look what I've done. And it makes you reassess. So in a way, that's what's happening. We're being confronted with the reality of our own choices. And it's the same thing with the low birth rates. This is a self-inflicted wound.
Yeah.
This is done. We've done this to ourselves. So when you think of South Korea, when you think, which has one of the lowest numbers in the world, below 1, when you think of people in Japan or in the even the United States at 1.6, so you look at Italy 1.1. This is all done. We've done this to ourselves. We've done this. It can be undone, all right? But to literally do that, Colleen, we have to turn the iceberg over. And we have to see what we've done.
Yeah.
We have to see it. and realize we have done this, which means we need to change what we've done.
Well, and that was part of the reason I wanted to be able to have this conversation today, because I think it's important to be aware of what abuses are happening, what's going on, have a little bit of that shock of like, oh, this is real and this is happening and
Right.
this is some of the problems. But then on the flip side, also be able to talk about the hopeful things, because that's what heartens you to keep fighting, is when you know that there is hope, that there is resistance happening. And
Right.
again, I think you saw that with the transgender movement, where these abuses came out. People were horrified. People spoke up about it and shared the story. And
Right.
as the word spread, then all of a sudden you start gaining ground, and then that gives people hope and incentive to keep moving in that direction. So I'm hoping that something similar can happen around the topics of euthanasia and
agree.
assisted suicide, where
And
people can wake up and
well,
push back.
and also it's just that, that sadly we have a very progressive media that controls much of the conversation. So you're not going to hear a lot of these things, and so it's going to take people really paying attention.
Yeah.
Doing their diligence. But also I would say this, and just in closing, and we've talked about this before, but also we can come back and do this again, is what does the church advocate for with regard to end-of-life issues?
Yes.
And so how have I set up a proxy, a surrogate, someone that's going to be able to speak for me when I cannot speak for myself, someone who understands those principles and those perspectives and those approaches and what is morally permissible, what is not.
Yeah.
That conversation needs to happen long before I'm at death's door.
Yeah.
It should be happening already, even among young couples, young people, middle-aged people, even when there's no illness in sight. These are things that should be discussed. And realization is that, and not just accepted that this is what this person's going to do on my behalf.
Yeah.
Have you really spoken about it? And have you legally named a proxy? Someone, again, that speaks for you when you cannot speak for yourself.
And do you know where to go for the answers to the questions that you might have
That's
in
correct.
those circumstances?
That's
Like
right.
one person doesn't necessarily have to have all the answers of what
Right.
end-of-life care is ethical and what you can do in a certain situation, but knowing that you can turn to the National Catholic Bioethics Center, knowing that you can turn to different resources where you can ask these questions and have these conversations.
Exactly. And knowing that the church's principles are there.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of looking for them, but they're not hard to find. They're not hiding in the dark. They're there. They're visible. They're right in front of us. And, and I will tell you, everywhere I go, like on this mission, this is one of the things I'm going to be discussing.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but I get questions all the time in the mission field. My mother, my father, my spouse is in this situation. And they mean this in the way that it's implied, in the goodness. What am I obligated? So it's not so much a negative in the sense trying to get away with something.
No,
They're
but
just
how do I
asking
make
a
sure-
legitimate question.
How do I fulfill what I need to fulfill to be like,
That's right.
not in a check the boxes kind of
Exactly.
thing, but just making
Exactly.
sure that you're showing up in every way that you need to be.
Absolutely. And that's exactly.
Yeah.
And so, and it's amazing with the people's questions and how they feel I didn't know that, Father. I didn't realize that. So this goes back to the parish level.
Yeah.
If we want to stop what we see on top of the iceberg,
Yeah.
flip the thing over
And just start healing
and
the
start
bottom.
healing that and empowering people with the truth and with the wisdom they need and the experience the church can bring and advocate for life.
Yeah.
And defend life. That's so you can tell I'm very passionate about this, like I am about many things. And like you said, be brief. I'm not too sure I can be brief, but it's just the understanding that this is the passion that's needed.
Yeah.
This is what John Paul does, and I'm not going to say any more after that. Is this why he said, the gospel of life is the gospel.
Yeah.
And we need to be passionate about this. We need to truly be passionate and determined, all right, and our desire to see this to its end. Yeah. And anything that threatens life at any stage is unacceptable. Is unacceptable. Yeah. And so I do see great signs. I see opportunity, but we cannot be on our laurels. We have to be vigilant.
Yes.
So
Amen.
Fight the fight.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation,
You're
Father.
welcome.
And I hope that you have a good travels to the Philippines tomorrow.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Pray for the mission in the Philippines. It'll be a busy nearly 2 weeks of activity. So
I can't wait to
looking
hear
forward
about
to it as always.
Yes. And to all of our audience, please like and subscribe. If you have any questions in particular about these topics, end-of-life care, please let us know in the comment section so that we can cover it in a future episode. And as always, keep on living the culture of life. God bless.